Many artists swear that paper is the most essential part of your watercolour supplies, and I would tend to agree. Paper is the source of light and the foundation for your paint. But paper's quality and handling properties vary enormously depending on the type and the brand. This makes choosing paper somewhat confusing, especially for beginners. So in this comprehensive guide, I'll tell you all you need to know about watercolour paper and how to make an informed choice about what to use. So what is watercolour paper? Watercolour paper is a relatively thick and absorbent paper specially designed for wet mediums like watercolours. It enhances the luminosity of watercolour pigments to their fullest. It can be made from cotton fibres, wood pulp or a mixture of both, and it's available in different surface finishes and various thicknesses. Although the most commonly used type is cold press 300 GSM or 140 pounds. Now that's a fairly broad answer. As you can probably guess, there are many variations within the characteristics described above. For example, the composition, thickness and surface finish all affect how the paper handles with watercolours. Also, the materials used to make the watercolour paper will determine its strength, longevity and price. I'll go into all these details later. But first of all, a lot of beginners ask if they really need a special kind of paper to paint with watercolour. Just so you have no doubts, let me explain. The answer is yes, you do need a particular kind of paper to paint correctly with watercolours. Because this painting medium is so wet compared to others, you need a surface that can withstand a lot of moisture. The clue is in the name. They don't call it watercolour paper for nothing. Also, a lot of people ask what's the difference between watercolour paper and normal paper. Watercolour paper is thicker and generally more robust than ordinary paper stock. It also has a special internal and surface finish known as paper sizing. This alters the absorbency of the paper. This treatment allows the paint to be absorbed into the paper fibres in a balanced way, allowing the artist time to play with the paint before it dries. So what is the best watercolour paper? And what makes it so good anyway? For watercolour painting, the best quality paper is made of 100% cotton. It's also acid-free with a neutral pH value. It will also be archival, meaning the paper will preserve its properties over a long period of time and your painting won't fade. Cotton is stronger and more durable than paper made from wood cellulose. Its fibres are longer, making it tougher and more resistant. If you've ever tried painting on a sheet of standard paper, you'll see how it disintegrates when you apply wet brushstrokes. See what happens to a sheet of printer paper after just a couple of minutes. The watercolour paper, on the other hand, keeps the moisture on the surface so you can play around with the paint before it dries. This is also thanks to the sizing. The strength of cotton makes it suitable for use with wet mediums like watercolour. This type of paper is more durable and dimensionally stable, meaning it retains its shape better than cotton-based papers. Cotton also has excellent absorbency properties, and cotton is also naturally white, which means the paper needs little bleaching or other treatments to alter the colour appearance. The acid-free pH neutral aspect is also pretty important. If you remember from your chemistry classes, pH is a measure of the acidity of a substance. Acid-free and pH-neutral paper indicates it was made using an alkaline pulp that has a neutral pH. Wood pulp is naturally acidic, but cotton is naturally archival and pH-neutral. The term archival means that a painting will last a long time without deteriorating. When we talk about archival paper, we're actually talking about its acidity. Acid messes up the longevity of paper. It causes the paper to discolour over time and can even degrade certain paint pigments. That's why you should look for acid-free paper. This property renders the paper archival, meaning it remains stable over a long time without deteriorating. After all, you want your masterpieces to last for centuries, right? Another aspect of watercolour paper worth mentioning is the tint or general colour appearance. Most papers are not pure white. They need some kind of treatment to make them brighter or more uniform in appearance. As mentioned earlier, cotton paper is naturally white, but not bright white. Some manufacturers add OBAs or optical brightening agents to make the paper whiter. Extra white papers are generally altered with these chemicals. But optical brightening agents don't last forever. They fade over time and cause watercolour paints to shift in colour. That's why artist quality archival papers are not whitened in this way. For longevity, you should favour natural off-white paper. All of that is quite a lot of information to take in. So to sum up, these are the properties of watercolour paper you should look for if you want the best possible quality. 100% cotton, acid-free, pH neutral, archival and a traditional colour. That being said, cotton paper is the most pricey option. If you're just starting out with watercolours, it's understandable that you're reluctant to splash out on high-priced paper. The ideal type of watercolour paper for absolute beginners is commonly known as academy-grade paper. These are generally made out of cheaper wood cellulose. This paper has a different quality, durability and archival properties than artist-grade paper, but it's more affordable for getting started with watercolours. It's true, the best watercolour paper can be pretty expensive. The highest quality is generally classed as artist-grade paper. Because of its high price, this may not be the perfect option for beginners. Spending large amounts of money and living in fear of ruining the paper isn't fun. As an alternative, manufacturers make student-grade papers that are more affordable. This makes them better suited to artists who are getting started with this medium and want to experiment. They're cheaper because they use lower-grade materials such as wood pulp. The internal and surface sizing is also usually lower quality. Since we're talking about sizing, let me explain more about what this is. This is an essential factor affecting the paint's handling properties on the paper surface. Traditionally, the substance used for sizing is gelatin. All watercolour paper is sized to alter its absorbency, but sizing involves finding a delicate balance. The paper needs to be sufficiently absorbent to fix the pigments to the paper fibres, but at the same time not so porous that it sucks the paint deep into the paper, making the colours look dull. Good quality sizing can make all the difference to ease of use. So in general there are two types of watercolour paper on the market: academy paper and artist's quality paper. I consider academy paper essential for beginning with watercolours. It allows you the freedom to splash paint around and develop your early skills without worrying about price constraints. But as you progress, you'll benefit by transitioning to artist-grade paper to experience watercolours to their fullest. By the way, if you'd like some lessons to get you started with watercolours, I offer a series of free lessons to anyone who signs up to my email newsletter. I've also created a downloadable worksheet for this lesson on watercolour paper. I'll put the links in the description below. You'll also find a link to my Patreon membership where you can get an ad-free version of this video tutorial plus other exclusive bonuses that I only share with members of my Patreon channel. The next most important property of watercolour paper is its texture. There are three categories of texture ranging from smooth to coarse. These are hot press, cold press and rough. Hot press is smooth, cold press has a medium texture and rough paper has the most pronounced grain. You'll notice that watercolour paint performs in a distinct way on each surface finish. Each of these textured surfaces has a different interaction with the paint. Here's a quick overview of each one. Hot press paper has the smoothest surface finish. The name comes from the production process of pressing the paper between hot metal rollers to generate a smoother surface. This surface is perfect for detailed paintings. There's no grain to interrupt the flow of your brushstrokes. It's also well adapted to mixed media techniques like pen and wash. However, this surface is harder and less absorbent than cold press or rough paper. This means it can be tricky to work with as a beginner because the paint absorbs slowly and watercolour washes can pool on the surface, leaving unpredictable effects such as backgrounds and blooms. Cold pressed paper is also classified as NOT, which stands for not hot pressed, which I guess is a bit of a mouthful, so it's more commonly referred to as cold press. This name describes the manufacturing process where the paper is pressed between cold metal rollers. The rollers are covered in felt, which imparts a slight texture. Cold pressed paper accepts detailed brushwork quite well, but artists can also easily paint textured brushstrokes. This makes the paper well suited to a wide range of painting styles. Cold press is more absorbent than hot press paper, but generally less absorbent than rough. All these qualities make it the most forgiving type of paper for newcomers. It has a reputation for being easy to use and can tolerate some corrections. Yes, you guessed it, rough paper is the most heavily textured painting surface for watercolors. Rough papers are pressed between coarse felt sheets, which emboss the texture onto the damp paper as it dries. Brushstrokes and irregular watercolor effects such as granulation are more pronounced on this paper surface. This makes it well adapted to expressive painting styles. Rough papers are also the most absorbent but less easy to work with if you're new to watercolors. So what's the best texture for watercolor painting? Cold pressed paper is the first choice of most watercolorists. The moderate texture makes this the most flexible surface finish because it adapts to so many different ways of painting. Now let's talk about the thickness of the paper. Different thicknesses of watercolor paper are expressed by weight. The heavier the paper, the thicker it is. The most popular and versatile paperweight is 140 pounds or 300 GSM. All manufacturers express weight in two measures, pounds or pounds per ream, and GSM, which stands for grams per square metre. This first method is an older traditional system of measuring paper thickness. The pounds measurement corresponds to 1 ream of full imperial sheets. But this is also the least accurate way of measuring paper thickness. The more modern and reliable form of measurement is GSM, which is the weight in grams of one sheet of paper measuring 1 square metre. Now, the reason why paper thickness is important is because of the paper's tendency to warp when wet. The thicker the paper, the less it warps, but it also gets more expensive. Again, the best compromise in terms of thickness is 140 pounds or 300 GSM. You can begin to see why this is the most popular type of watercolor paper. It's just the right thickness to avoid warping in most painting situations, and at the same time it's more affordable than very thick paper. You might also have noticed that watercolor paper is available in a confusing array of formats and dimensions. However, I think that the most common and versatile form is 9 by 12 inch watercolor pads. Watercolor sheets are sold in traditional large-sized formats, the biggest being, as I mentioned earlier, the imperial full sheet. But not all artists, particularly beginners, need paper this large. Watercolor pads, on the other hand, are extremely handy. The sheets of paper are glued along one edge, making them easy to remove. And pads offer a wide variety of smaller, ready-to-use dimensions. Watercolor blocks are also available in a wide range of dimensions. Blocks are glued on all 4 sides. This keeps them slightly flatter when working with wet watercolor washes. However, blocks prevent you from tracing onto the surface. You have to freehand your pencil outlines onto the paper, which is time consuming and potentially harms the paper as you erase the sketch lines. That's why my favourite format is watercolor pads. So, taking into account all of these different parameters, what watercolor paper should you choose? If it helps, here are the 2 brands of paper I tend to use on a daily basis. Arches 100% cotton cold press paper and Canson XL cold press watercolor paper. Both of these are 140 pounds or 300 grams per square metre, and I tend to go for pads wherever possible. Whatever brand you buy, remember as a general rule you'll do well with paper that has a medium texture and a medium thickness. Start out with Academy paper, then when you're ready try artist grade watercolor paper. And if you're still stuck for choice, why not try a sample of different types of paper? Most artists end up finding their own personal preference. If you'd like to download a free worksheet including all the details discussed in this lesson, you'll find a link to my blog in the description below. Now go check out this other video where I'll show you an easy way to find inspiration for your next painting. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to press pause or rewind whenever you want to get a better look at the painting process.